Welcome to East Coast Winemaking, the podcast that brings professional winemaking experience from popular wine regions on the East Coast of the United States to wherever you are. I'm your host, John Monier. I'm a Finger Lakes winemaker, and I'm excited to provide easy access to educational and entertaining interviews with other winemakers and industry professionals. In each episode, we'll cover the background and unique perspective of my guest on how they approach the craft of winemaking. I'm excited for the opportunity to learn from seasoned wine pros and hope these interviews can be informative to both colleagues in the industry as well as relative newcomers. Feel free to email questions or comments to eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com and follow us at East Coast Winemaking on Instagram to be notified when new episodes come out. If you're interested in checking out my wine called John Albert, you can find info on that at johnalbertwine.com. Hello, everybody. I hope y'all are doing wonderfully. Hope everybody's staying warm, at least up here in the Finger Lakes in the middle of November. It is getting darn chilly. I can't believe it's almost Thanksgiving. I don't know about y'all. Today I'm bringing you a podcast with a super cool and interesting winemaker who prior to this interview I had not met, but had heard a lot about and had tasted some of his wines, and so I was really thrilled to be able to get him on the podcast. His name is Bryan Ulbrich. He's the owner of Left Foot Charley, which is a winery out of Traverse City, Michigan. And Michigan is a place that I know very little about, or at least prior to this conversation, I knew especially little about. So it was a lot of fun to connect with Bryan. And what I learned is that Michigan is a fascinating place where really high quality wines are being made. And Bryan is one of those winemakers who, you know, you start to get talking and you just want to pull everything out of his brain, you know, as much as you can. So I really was thrilled to be able to chat with him. I hope y'all enjoy the conversation that I had with him as much as I enjoyed having it. And I'll just leave it to that. Should you find the opportunity to try Left Foot Charley wines, I highly suggest it, and I suspect after you listen to this, you will feel the urge as much as I do. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for being here. Hello, everybody. I am here with Bryan Ulbrich. Is that the correct pronunciation?
That's how we say it, yep.
Bryan Ulbrich, owner and winery Sherpa, as noted on your website, of Left Foot Charley, which is located in Traverse City, Michigan. How are you doing today, Bryan?
Excellent. It was a beautiful day today up here. Some sunshine and kind of that reminder that it's still autumn amid the threatening winter that's impending for sure.
I'm begging for some of those slightly more approachable days. It was breezy and cloudy in the Finger Lakes today, so I'm envious of you. And I'm interested to hear more about your relationship with the weather and how it relates to the Old Mission Peninsula. Is that right?
That's where most of our vineyards are.
Yeah. I don't mean to jump ahead, but you know, part of one of the things that jumps out to me as somebody from the Finger Lakes when I look at your region and your winery is, you know, how that section of Michigan and where your grapes are grown are, you know, relate to the weather. But anyway, let's not get ahead. I have a bad tendency of wanting to go down rabbit holes immediately. If you would, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and would you please start wherever you want, but I would love to hear where your interest in winemaking began, through to how Left Foot Charley came to existence, and any of the noteworthy, you know, moments in your life between those 2 points.
All right, I can do that for sure. Well, it all started last century, and a young student. I was getting a master's degree in Arizona, and basically I needed a job, and I answered a want ad, and it was for a winery, and I had only been around wine in the sense that my mother loves it, and loves it like in the Gallo jug version back from the 80s and all that in the 70s. So it wasn't like a wine family or anything, but it was just an interesting job opportunity. And the part of it that really got me is they took me out for breakfast for the job interview. So I got a free meal to grad school. I'm like, wow, this is great. And this is like 1993 or something. And so I don't know, it just felt like, wow, this is pretty nice. And I ended up working in the tasting room, but it was at Webb Winery, which was the oldest winery, the first winery in Arizona at the time. And just got kind of pulled into the back to do winemaking things, like simple things like run hoses, or I remember working a Sauvignon Blanc skin contact pump over type thing, and then doing punch downs. And the big moment for me was I was really starting to get into it, doing tours and just being around wine, and kind of I was moderately interested in just the fermentation side of things, only from being there. And then I remember one day specifically, I was alone in the winery. I was going to lock up, and I was cleaning a tank, and I backed into the back wall of the tank I was standing in. My paycheck got wet. It was in my pocket. And I was worried because it could have bled, and I needed to cash the check. And I was worried it might like smear. I remember looking at that paycheck thinking, you just got paid to work in this winery. Like, this is a legit job. You should maybe think about this as where could you go? And so I talked to Robert Webb, the winemaker owner, and he got me into brewing a little bit, gave me some magazines, to look into, journals, things like that. And I don't know, I didn't pursue it immediately, but it was always kind of stuck in my head that there's this world out there that I should probably look into. So fast forward a little bit, Arizona I loved, but I came from the Midwest, and there's a lot of water up here, and there isn't a lot of water down there. And I kind of felt like I should be near water. And so I moved up to northern Michigan, kind of knew about the wine scene a little bit, in that they were making some wines, a lot of interesting Riesling. And there was a small industry. I think there was 7 or 8 wineries up here when I moved up.
What year around was that?
This would have been 95. And then my wife and I girlfriend turned wife moved up here together. And I got a job at Peninsula Cellars as kind of an apprentice position. There was only 2 of us. Lee Lutz was the winemaker, and he kind of brought me on to kind of help do everything. It was a full hands-on winery, from everything from working the cherry harvest to driving tractors, working the vineyard side of it, doing wine work, and then going out and doing sales. And he ended up leaving to start Black Star Farms. And then I was graciously offered the opportunity to take over some winemaking after a couple of years from the Kropa family. And I really learned a ton from them. The Kropa family is a 5th generation cherry farming family that diversified their farm to get into grapes. They had apples and peaches and all kinds of stuff going on. But the winery came in 94, and then really grew. And I got to be part of that period here in Michigan, where there's a lot of investment going into the wine, into the vineyards and the wineries. There was kind of explosive growth from like 1998 really up till now. In terms of new investments, older wineries investing deeper into their facilities and vineyards. And that's really where a lot of Michigan had been around since the late 60s, really growing grapes. But in that mid 90s forward period, there was just a kind of an explosion of growth. And so that period was great. We did a lot together. We had some really amazing accomplishments in terms of the vineyards and the wines we were making together. And there was just kind of the end of the contract was coming, and it was sort of the family was becoming self-sufficient with grape growing, and looking at kind of taking over. We had a lot of satellite growers at the time. So basically I was on my way out, and I realized there's all these small farms that didn't have a home for their fruit. And so I assembled 3 or 4 1-acre, 2-acre farms, and said, hey, let's start making some wine together. Kind of realized I wouldn't have the wherewithal to own a vineyard in terms of like how land values are around here. And so decided I could do a little different model, a little more of a co-op model in the sense of let's find some people that are really into wine growing and I'll handle the winemaking and rely on them for the fruit sourcing. And so we started off with, I think, well, it was one vineyard initially. And that first vineyard was one that was fun. It was a Riesling vineyard that had been sold, and the new owner didn't know what was going on. And so Jen, my wife, and I traded our vacation time for the fruit. And that was really how we started. It was 3 tons of Riesling. We worked the vineyard from really the latter half. It was like from July forward, and salvaged the section of Riesling from kind of an abandoned vineyard. And that's where we made our first wine. And then we kind of pushed that forward into the next one and into the next one. And from there, kind of assembled some farms together. And we're now kind of a composite of what's going on in northern Michigan. 2004 was our first vintage. And we started again with the one vineyard, grew to 2 and then 3. And then now we're at about 15 independent farms that grow exclusively with us. And are looking at mostly Old Mission Peninsula, but one other vineyard in Benzie County, just south of us. And it's kind of a way to look at bringing the farms into the urban environment. Our winery's in Traverse City, so we're not out on farm country, but we can bring the vineyards in and let people experience what this region has to offer. And like the Finger Lakes, we have so many different little microclimatic and geographical realities that to have one estate could be considered impractical in a way, because you might have vast areas that are not plantable on that estate because of the hills and the way the soils lay. So we can have the benefit of having, the best of this hillside and the best of that hillside and bring them into our winery and kind of highlight the whole region.
Super interesting. You're already hitting on a number of things that, as I was perusing your wine and your About Us section on your website, questions that I was asking myself. The first is the vacation that you gave up to collect those first grapes, the Riesling grapes for your first harvest. I'm wondering what vacation that was that you gave up.
Actually, that's something really exotic in mind. It's actually, we're just going to see an old family spot, not far from here, but it's
Okay.
on Lake Michigan, and we go there every year just to kind of decompress and get away from everything. We didn't give up the entire vacation, but there was a panic moment of crop thinning, and actually what we did was cut out powdery mildew infected fruit, dropped on the ground, and so there are a lot of things you go through in a marriage, but asking your 1 year into a marriage, asking your wife to go and cut mildewed fruit together. Pretty fun. Well, it wasn't 1 year. I'm sorry. We were married much longer than that. But that first year of business, I meant, hey, let's go do this. Yeah, cut all this stinky fruit out. But that's where we started.
I guess it's good to have business partners that are like-minded, and can see the vision alongside you in that regard.
Yeah, it can be dangerous to go into business with your spouse. My parents did it, but Jen now handles all of our financial end of things. She's the organized thinker of things. I'm more the dreamer, kind of that end of side of the whole business. So.
I think that's a good dynamic to have. That's a similar way with my partner and I think.
It works well for us. So.
Yeah, nice. You said that you had either completed or were in the midst of getting a master's degree when you first got that job at the winery in Arizona. What were you studying?
I did finish it. I was in the American they called it the American Indian Studies program. So it was basically constitutional Supreme Court law studies based around tribal rights and indigenous, land agreements and things like that. I studied water rights, basically.
Super interesting. At that point in your life, before the wine industry grabbed you, did you have a direction that you were chasing?
I wasn't chasing as much as trying to surf. I was trying to stay in school because I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was following things that were interesting to me. And the whole relationship between the tribal reality and America is, foundational to our country anyways. And so I was really fascinated by how um, that relationship has evolved, morphed, been both problematic, and what opportunities are there for tribes to work their sovereignty into new realities.
Hmm.
Part of what I learned, I don't know, maybe this isn't publishable, but one of the things I learned is the last thing they need is another kid from the suburbs trying to tell them what to do.
Hmm.
It's more supporting the fact that they are independent and they have the right to decide their future based on their own historical and political reality. So,
Sure, that's super interesting. Well, and I think it gives us some perspective on you as an individual. I'm never surprised when I ask winemakers kind of how they got into the game, and they have a path that is maybe not straightforward. Um,
yeah,
Super interesting.
like it's a cavern we fall into.
You get sucked in, or you get bit by the bug. Some people say.
Yeah, it definitely is a lure that attracts,
Yeah. So, Left Foot Charlie, my understanding is in an old asylum.
Yeah, back in the 1800s, all across the East Coast, they were building asylums, and they went as far west as Minnesota, I believe. And so there was four of these campuses in Michigan, and this is one of the largest preserved asylum properties from back in that era. They're called Kirkbride buildings. And so the architecture is pretty, for this area, very ornate. It's all built with local clay and brick that was formed here. The buildings it was at the time it was like 3,000 acres of a campus.
Whoa.
There was 4,000 residents. Our building was the last one built in the 50s, and it was an old laundry facility. So it's not as ornate and pretty as some of the original buildings, but it's part of this story of our region. And it was quite an accomplishment to have an asylum because it brought in both like jobs and like economic reality, but it also brought in expertise and like a knowledge base to, and, you're talking late 1800s, this is lumber country. And so you had a doctor that went out and like advocated to get a facility here. And when we think about asylums, you think of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's more at that time there was a lot of things that weren't understood, like epilepsy and basic depression and isolation. There was a lot of farmers here because they'd be out farming like raw land that had just been cleared of original growth trees and stuff, and people would kind of lose it a little bit. And so the word asylum, a place of peace, they built it around the concept of beauty as therapy. And so there was a whole agricultural component as well as kind of a job training component. And they didn't have drugs and electroshock therapy in the early days. Some of that stuff came through here. But really the whole foundational principle was to give a kind of a hand up and a positive life experience to people to help them get through struggles. And this place did it. It was a quarantine area as well, which got weird during COVID, like to think, wow, this used to be quarantine for TB and influenza and that kind of stuff. And here we are at COVID, and we're selling wine out of the old library or laundry facility. So what comes around goes around. And now it's sort of like a little Central Park kind of area of Traverse City. The community bought it and came up with a development or a continuation plan more so than development. So the buildings have been preserved largely, and there's hiking trails, and it's a gorgeous little slice within an urban environment.
Wow, that is super cool. I had no idea about the history of asylums in that sense. And actually, maybe it sounds shallow now that you've painted such a beautiful picture, but my next question to ask about the asylum is it haunted? But it feels like maybe it wasn't that kind of asylum. I mean, it sounds like it was a lot more peaceful than I was kind of imagining, just having heard the word.
In this country, you have more of it out east. As you go west, obviously the history gets a little more compressed. But I think anytime you have old buildings, there's always a way to interpret what's still hanging around from the old memories. And
Mm.
things I love, like our barrel room is up in a cellar or a root cellar that was built in 1900 to house root vegetables for the crew here. And so we have barrels sitting in a building. So 1900 for us seems very old. Obviously in Europe, that's, a new build. But there's history and there's definitely voices and, thoughts and things going on here that you can interpret. If you want it to be freaky or scary, go for it. Or it could be a hand up as well. So, yeah.
Wow, cool perspective. Wow. Well, now I mean, we're only what 15 minutes in, and I want to come even more. And before, I was super interested in the wine, but now I really want to see the property. It sounds like a really interesting place to have as your home away from home, your business. Not to mention, you get to do something cool like make wine in it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I have these visions of like the old days, like somebody up in the actual like asylum building looking down and like calling a nurse and saying, "Hey, they're making wine in the laundry building." Was that seeing the future as opposed to being crazy? But yeah, we started off just when we moved. So we were in a garage. My goal was to be a garagiste, winemaker, and only make a couple, wines. And I got kind of hooked by. I was making custom wines for other, custom crush facility kind of thing. And when I was leaving, the other place that a lot of my custom clients wanted to stick with us, and I didn't have resources to buy equipment and all that. And so quickly it became evident that in order to be a small winemaker in our region, which is not too dissimilar from the Finger Lakes, but less wineries, um, but we're all fairly small, that you don't have the resources to afford the equipment and the staff and the facilities and all of that to make it economically viable. So I coupled up with a couple of other growers essentially that were looking for a winemaker. And so Leftfoot has always been a sort of a cooperation between farms, whether it's under Leftfoot brand or our custom client, custom crush brands. And through that, we've collectively kind of grown bigger now, and we're up to about 7 custom crush clients, and have kind of share in that concept that okay, now we have 2 really interesting presses we can use as opposed to 7 people having their own press or 7 bottling lines and all of that, and try to keep the economic reality viable so that we can take wines that people are not necessarily ready to taste in terms of it's from Michigan. We're definitely an outlier in the concept of where wine should be grown. And now we can at least bring it to the market with some power of scale behind us.
Sure. Yeah. Scale, you said 7 custom crush. I'm trying to imagine. It sounds like that's a lot of winemaking going on in one building. What kind of volume are you producing?
Well, now we're up to we did I can say this because I just looked at it. We did 486 tons last year. So, but we have since created another winemaking facility about 5 miles from here to handle the pressing and the fruit receipt. We did up to 300 tons here in the asylum, and it worked, but it started to get populated. We have a lot of different. There's housing and offices and restaurants and coffee shops and all kinds of stuff around it. It's a little city center, and so you can imagine unloading flatbed trucks and all of a sudden a kid's riding by on a bike or a dog loose. And so it became quick, kind of a realization over, took us 20 years, I guess, to figure it out. But so we built a facility that's closer out in farm country a little bit more where we can actually just produce. And then here in the asylum, we still make some wines. I've got like a winemaking studio here, so I'm back to the garagiste thing. Finally, got to what I was after, and then we also make hard cider here. So yeah, as a facility, we're bigger than what we appear, but we're serving again seven winery clients, and then I don't know how many actual vineyards that comprises. Then it's something like 60 different vineyards that come into our area or into our facility.
Wow. And you're in charge of all the decision making regarding the winemaking that goes on.
No,
That's, I was gonna say that sounds exhausting.
I've learned that it's a better path to get smarter people than you to work with you. So I've been able to hire smarter, and I have an amazing crew. Wes has been our cellar master. He's now the lead winemaker at the facility that we created. We call Caravan, Caravin. So it's like a caravan of people going around to collect their wares or sell their wares. But Vin, so it's the Caravine, I guess, if you want to get all symbolic about it.
Love it.
That facility, Wes has kind of taken over. He's been with us for over 10 years now, and he's now kind of leading the winemaking crew and the staffing and directions on that. And then the rest of our crew, a lot of them have been with us for 5+ years. So we're trying to use this new production facility as a way to help young winemakers grow into where they want to go, and whether that's move up in the industry in terms of responsibility or find their own brands, or just both encourage youth but also give them an opportunity. And then selfishly, they're still working with us. We're not losing them to competition in that sense. So it's becoming a learning training center as well for young, talented, strong backs.
But that's wonderful. As somebody who I've worked at Ravines now since 2015, which I think is the same when Wes started, based on what I saw on the website, and have gotten to a point where I've accumulated much more responsibility than when I began, and been promoted and had the opportunity to make some of my own wine. And I have some friends in similar situations, and we dream or philosophize sometimes about the opportunity for something kind of exactly like you're describing, some sort of co-op opportunity where like-minded small brands can get together and try to pool some funding to be able to work in everybody's favor. So I have a lot of appreciation for what you're doing for the winemaking community up there. I think that's wonderful.
This year was really fun too. We had a number of new small clients come in, brands, where, I mean, brands makes it sound big, but individual winemakers. In the past, a lot of people were coming to me to make the wine, and so I did have like the executive control over everything. But this year we have a couple different winemakers that are coming in, and they're making maybe 400 gallons or something, and they're coming in and part of the whole scene. And so there's a lot of different personalities and ideas circulating around that facility, which is stimulating. It's interesting. It's challenging, and it's bringing, I guess, fresh energy keeps coming in. And the wine industry, it's easy to get into rhythms and like, here's how we do things. And so I think it's been really helpful for me as an old guy to get inspiration from new concepts.
Totally. Yeah, it's serendipitous. I think that you're saying that. I totally agree. And myself, get a very strong natural high when I get to be in a situation where there's winemakers talking about ideas. Right now, the gentlemen that I work with at Ravines are, we work together. I think, well, just naturally between us, there's this kind of yearn for education and new ideas and innovation. And I feel that way among some of my winemaking friends. And I think it benefits everybody. It's one of the big reasons why I enjoy doing this podcast so much, and having the opportunity to speak with people that have different ideas than I do and different experiences, because, I feel like it makes me think differently about my relationship to my wine, and it feels like a big step in growing, is opening your ears to other people.
Absolutely. And it's some of the fun ones are when someone comes and you're like, well, that's dumb. I would never do that. And then you see something in it, whether it's a failure or success. Normally the success is you're like, wow, that worked out a lot better than I thought it would. I want to try that. And so there's a number of things we've done that have been sort of inspired out of being pushed by somebody who's saying, here's my philosophy and I want to work this way. There's other things I'm pretty stalwart on. I'm like, nope, I'm doing it. I know what I want to do with this fruit. Leave me alone. But that inspiration, that sharing concept, is we're looking at an industry that is struggling in the sense of, the malaise of no one's drinking anymore, the young people aren't drinking or whatever. It's not really true. It's that I think the people that are exploring wine are more interested in process, sourcing, and energy behind the whole concept of what's going on. And to be surrounded by youth is definitely making me feel younger, and I think keeping our wines alive longer, in general. And I think it'll be one of the thing, the big challenges is keeping people coming into this industry and keeping them interested. And so if we can provide pathways for, both learning, but also economic and income, it's going to be a win situation for our region.
Totally. Yeah, I feel the same way as you, where for a long time, I felt like I have strict beliefs that I won't waver on. But winemaking as a practice is one of the most humbling ventures I've had the opportunity to engage in. And those strict beliefs that I have are regularly being reformed and worn away, because I think it's really easy to be critical of what other people are doing and to feel like you know your way until you're confronted, just like you're describing, with opportunities where something that you would have thought based on your winemaking philosophy or your rules, should crash and burn, ends up being awesome, and then you have to reformat. So yeah, that's super interesting. It makes me immediately want to go into talking about some of your wines, because there are a couple of things that I really want to speak with you about, but I don't want to glaze over the vineyard sites, because I think that working with so many vineyards, it sounds like you're in a unique position, at least in relationship to a lot of the other winemakers and wineries that I know and have spoken to, either on the podcast or just in my personal life. What's it like working with so many sites? On one hand, my winemaking brain gets super excited about the idea, because different grapes from different sites sounds like really exciting and that there's lots of opportunities, but it also sounds like maybe a logistics nightmare and a blending nightmare. And yeah, what's your vibe on it at this point?
Well, we've always done a lot of single vineyard wines. We do blends as well. And then when you factor in the custom client angle of things, we have become very good at the logistics of managing, I don't even know, hundreds fermentations, and keeping things in their tank. So it's not like we, bring everything in, blend it, make the style of wine. It's really trying to reflect where they're grown and who's growing them. Our area is glacial till. We are heavily reliant on water and the lakes that surround us. It's the only reason that we are not North Dakota, is that we have the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan is the size of West Virginia. So it's a huge body of water. It's mitigating things. Our soil types are not as defined as certain areas. I've been into the Finger Lakes, and I've been really staggered by, there's areas that have seemingly 8 inches of topsoil, and then it's solid rock. And then you have other areas that are sandy. And our area is so mixed up. I have vineyards that can have sandy loam up on the top and a river of clay running through the middle, and it's all silty down at the bottom. Or there's a big gravel pit somewhere, and it can be within a 5-acre vineyard. You can have 3 different soil types. And so
Wow.
One of our big influences here is the aspect of the land. How high is it? Which direction is it facing? Is it an east-facing slope or a west-facing slope? Is it on the north end of the peninsula or the south? The south tends to be a little bit, the water's shallower down there, so it gets a little less, it's a little more gravelly and clay down in that area generically. You have less wind typically than you do up north, and it's a little cooler and sandier. So it's a 20-mile long peninsula, only about a mile wide, 2 miles wide. So it's very distinct, different small sites that are around Old Mission. So what's fun about it is also just engaging the personalities of who's growing things and trying to incorporate them into the whole picture. Because you're dealing with people that actually they love work and they love wine, and we can never tell which they love more. And so you're trying to keep them encouraged as well. And there's a little bit of an arms race going on around here to grow better grapes than the other person next to you. So it sort of self-sustains. The identity of each vineyard is coming to us, and it's kind of like we're midwives to keep that identity going forward. And so it's less about us. In terms of the matrix of it all, it's similar to the Finger Lakes in that we have the challenges of the influences of Canadian fronts coming down our way, and how those are mitigated at each site is always different in every vintage. So falling back into rules is very difficult. We have sites that we know are generally cooler and be a little bit more acid driven maybe, or aromatically driven, and others that we like to exaggerate more of the body, and we can maybe push the ripening a little bit on. But it's really every year is kind of a new game for us, like who's showing up for the jam session type thing, and who's going to play. What is it going to sound like this year? I don't know if I've answered the question, but kind of rambling on.
Yeah, no, totally. How has working with so many sites influenced your perspective on terroir and where it comes from, and how important it is in making distinct and high quality wines? I mean, do you think that year after year, Riesling from the different vineyards where you get Riesling, they have a distinct through line, or what do you think?
I think generically, yes. We have our northern block of vineyards on the north end of Old Mission that pretty confident are always going to want and need a little bit of residual sugar. We have,
because the acid is quite high.
The acid is high. We tend to get good sugars up there as well. So there's an opportunity to balance sugar and acid well up in that area. In the southern vineyards, Riesling specific, we have one we call Terminal Moraine that really can tweak vintage to vintage. There's years that if we're going to make a dry Riesling, that's typically the vineyard that we will go to for that. But there's years like this last year where it doesn't really seem like it's a good candidate for a dry Riesling. So we are working with it right now with the eyes that maybe we're going to sort of halt the fermentation and then leave that sugar for a second fermentation in the bottle and do a sparkling. So there's a little bit of movement in that way, but overall, they seem to carry a profile that moves up and down vintage to vintage. So like last year was really warm, kind of an outlier vintage for us, where we had sort of exaggerated opportunities to get overripe if we wanted. It was one of the 2 or 3 out of 10 that we get where it's like you really have to pay attention to acids dropping too low. And that's always fun when you get a little bit of the pressure on to make sure you're in the vineyard and knowing what's going on as it's ripening. Whereas other vintages are like, it's a game of attrition where you're like, all right, it's fine, let it go. No frost coming, perfect.
How long can it sit out there? Yeah.
Let it ride, So I think the appreciation of terroir for me comes in a couple different realms. One is that the relative rot resistance on a site, the growth habits of it, and that kind of goes hand in hand, like how vegetative is that site. And then for us specifically on Old Mission, where is the heat accumulation coming from? Is it early morning sunshine drying things out? Or is it the later, in the day when it gets that long, drawn-out summer sun to ripen things? And we've pretty much positioned our different varietals based on those concepts of aspect and where things are on the peninsula.
Interesting. So you've had some say at what varieties are planted on what site, despite the fact that they're owned and managed by different individuals?
Yeah, almost 100%. Our farms have come to us pre-planting, and we've decided to work together on a project. there's a couple of examples of people that had really interesting sites that I've coveted that finally have we've been able to win over to our team. So we get some on the free agent market, and then but most of them are, our own farm team that we've been working with. That they've come and said, "Hey, I got this spot of land. What do you think?" And then one of our early questions is always, "What do you like to drink?" And we try to match personality with the site, but obviously the terroir and like the potential overrides that.
Sure, sure. Do you see big differences in vigor from site to site, even though they're all on the same stretch? Well, most of them are on the same stretch of peninsula. Um,
Yeah, a lot. There is certain sites that are very sandy. Like one of our assets is sandy soil. So if we get a lot of late season rains, it drains through the soil really well. But you compare those sites to something that has a little more organic matter or is, loamier, potentially a little bit warmer. We can have definitely more vegetative growth. We're surrounded by other crops as well. So we have cherry farms around a lot. And depending on what your neighbors are doing, you could also have like nitrogen leaching coming into your site. Could be a bad or a good thing depending on what you're looking at. I've got a site, that Terminal Moraine Vineyard has a top loamy, we call it the toupee, and then underneath it there's the scalp, which is just rock and gravel, and those plants are super small. And then up it's only an acre and a half, and on the top part of it it's a very vegetative, green growth everywhere that we have to do a lot of leaf pulling, shoot positioning, be very diligent on that side of it. Whereas in the scalp, it's barren. We're looking at planting in between every plant and just growing super small plants. So there is a lot of that within very small regions. I mean, 1 acre, 5 acres, you'll see a lot of variance.
It sounds super cool. It makes the same part of my winemaker brain that's excited about working with so many sites to hear that there's so much distinction. I mean, it sounds like it would be a lot of fun, to be playing around with those sites and their expression.
It is now. It was really frustrating when things were getting established, but now that there's like some, we've seen multiple vintages, decades of responses from these vines and where they're at, it's a little more comforting. And unfortunately on Old Mission, or not, I guess fortunately on Old Mission, there's some obvious places that are great to plant and some that are obviously not great to plant. There's a couple surprises in there. There's another Appalachian, Leelanau Peninsula, which has equally great growing sites, but it's much bigger. So you have areas that are more difficult to ascertain. Is this actually a really good site? It's harder to find or harder to know off the bat. Is this a great site? You really have to rely on like old farmer knowledge, kind of old lore, what used to grow there, what were the trends in terms of frost and ripening and other issues that might come up. I think the next phase for us in terms of farming really is looking at how we take, so a lot of our vines are hitting like 20 years old and older, and we're looking at how do we take this initial experimental phase of growing, and pushing that into like sustaining the growth and the health of the vineyards. The original vines, the vinifera, were planted in the mid 70s by the O'Keeffes. That kind of hung on. There's a little bit of planting in the 80s as well. And then the 90s was the big growth. So seeing these vineyards that are now established, and we were dealing with all the establishment and neophyte kind of learning curve of training and health and vine care and all that. And now we're at, year 20 to 30 plus, and like, all right, how do we keep this for another 30 years? What are the needs of the vineyard now? So there's a lot of work going into soil management, looking at how we're handling, ground cover and weeds and things like that.
Sure. What are your oldest vines that you're pulling from?
For me personally, they turned 30 this year. So
wow. And
there's 50-year-old vines around that vinifera.
do you have a take on, or in your experience, your opinion on the new vine, old vine, better wine, worse wine idea?
No, not really. I think we're all in young vines still, theoretically. I mean,
Sure.
European methods. So it's more site and management to me
Yeah, makes sense.
at this point. I've got young vineyards that are amazing. And I've got older vineyards that are struggling and older vineyards that are doing fantastic. So it's, yeah, to me, it's more management, and site selection.
Cool. How was the 2025 vintage for y'all? Like, how did it compare? I suppose what I'm specifically asking to historical vintages.
I would say it's perfectly, wonderfully normal.
Sometimes those vintages are, you love to have them.
Yes, we have great acidity, we have aromatics, we got every bit of ripeness that we would want. We're going to be able to make beautiful, complex wines within a 11 to 13% alcohol range, and so there weren't a lot of extremes. We didn't have rot issues, we didn't have heavy rains, we didn't have extreme heat or drought or anything. It was kind of a mixed bag. There was a lot of early rot pressure on the early side of the season where it was raining a lot, but the vineyards that really did their due diligence got through that okay. And then it dried out, and then we had a beautiful ripening season. We got a little bit of late season rains, but by then things were already kind of positioned. So we did have a little bit of deer pressure and critter pressure, but it wasn't extreme. So I think this is one, if we're going to point to like, what does Michigan do? And if we could ever call something normal, this would be a really good normal.
Is it mostly agricultural land on that peninsula?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
Mostly cherries. We're in the cherry capital of the U.S. We grow more tart cherries than anywhere. And sweet cherries, apples, plums, peaches, apricots.
Cool. Yeah. If anybody who's listening wants to, I would suggest you look at a image of the peninsula and how it juts out into Lake Michigan, because it's easy to, once you see it, understand how big of an impact the lake must have on that property. And one of the things that went through my mind as I was looking is in 2023, we had a spring frost that put everybody into a tizzy. And I think for some people was really damaging. And to other vineyards, I think that were more protected. We didn't see much effect from it. Do you ever see anything like that? I guess I'm trying to gauge by asking that question, like how significant the tempering effects are of the lake.
Spring frosts are becoming more of a reality now than they were when I was a young man. Yes, we can have them. One of the benefits is we are cooler. We're probably 2 weeks behind you guys in terms of bud break, but that gives us a little bit more of a window to get through some of those. The water's cold, keeps us cool, delays bud break. And then conversely, I mean, we just wrapped up harvest on last Friday. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good one. But it does, that warming of the summer gives us a little extension on the end of it. But the spring frost is becoming a little bit more of a concern as our winters get a little more iffy. They're not, they're not predictable at all. We can have a ton of snow or no snow. We get a lot of lake effect snow as our hope. So that it insulates the vines, because we can get pretty cold just like anywhere in this mid-continent region. But the bays definitely temper that. I live probably 5 miles inland from where our nearest vineyard is, and we will get frost at our house and the vineyards won't for weeks. And the weird thing is about the peninsula is it's between two bays. So Lake Michigan itself is 22,000 square miles or something. Its deepest point is like 900 feet. Most of it's about 400 feet or 300. The bays both get down to 500 and I think 700 feet deep. So the actual bays around the peninsula are really as impactful as Lake Michigan is for us, especially for Old Mission. So it's this concept of water being so significant. There was an article, I think it was in Wine Enthusiast just like this week, and they talked about the influence of lakes, and they were talking about all these regions. They talked about the Finger Lakes, of course, and everything, and they omitted Lake Michigan completely.
Stinkers.
Come on, there's a giant body of water there that, but that same thing that makes Seneca Lake so interesting for you guys have the Banana Belt, and it's the same thing that we have here on a different level or a same level or a different region, but same impact. And I think as we look at world regions and what they have to add to the wine conversation, the Great Lakes is as impactful as anything that's out there.
Yeah, it seems clear. I mean, if you look at a map, like I was just saying, my winemaker eyes think like, oh, hell yeah, obviously good wine grapes can grow there, no question. It seems perfectly suited for it.
Yeah, and you got the 45th parallel thing. It runs right through some of our vineyards. So that's, you're looking at Burgundy, Oregon, like
Right.
all the great spots, and I think it's more the tradition of wine sometimes gets in its own way from looking at the possibility of exploration. And that's changing vastly, which is so exciting with like young wine buyers and the new markets emerging in terms of people like wanting to explore as opposed to be taught what they should know. And I'm very encouraged by the direction things are going, even though it seems like things are down. They're not. It's just a transition phase.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your perspective just one more time as somebody who just started making wine a couple of years ago and is in the midst of being terrified by everybody telling me that wine consumption is going down. You don't get the vibe that that's true, that consumers are maybe just looking for something different, more local, more thoughtful?
I think consumption is going down relative to a period maybe 10 years ago, but that happens a lot, and it's a kind of a bobbing thing. I think what's important to look at is who is drinking wine right now, and then I guess who isn't. And it's if you look at like the youngest generation, let's say like from 21 to 28, maybe they aren't drinking wine right now, but do they really ever?
I was going to say, I really wasn't until I got
Yeah,
into the industry.
yeah. And so who's not drinking wine right now is the older people older than me because their cellars are full. They loaded up on stuff back whenever. Great. Yeah, they supported the industry for a long time. And I think us as winemakers and marketers haven't caught up necessarily to the fact that we have to change our messaging. I think you're doing it. I see a lot of young winemakers doing it, and we're trying as well to get away from the stodginess and the gatekeeping of the wine industry to this is a fun drink. It's fermented grape juice. It is that simple. It can get as deep and complex as you want, but it also can just be an enjoyable beverage. And so the more we embrace this stuff, and I apologize, I don't know enough about what you're doing, but I get the sense that you are mixing things up like vintage to vintage. And I think that's really interesting that, you're not like, I want to be a Pinot Gris producer and this is what I do great. You're playing around with different things. I think the more that we can engage people in finding new ways to explore is going to be what changes or brings the industry forward.
That's really interesting and in a selfish way exciting for you for me to hear you say, just to spend 45 seconds since you just touched on it. My project is intended to be an exploration for myself and like trying to understand variety and technique and terroir better. And what I had hoped initially was that the part that's exciting for me in that it's kind of an exploration, if it were communicated properly to a consumer, that they may also find interesting, just knowing that that's my perspective on it and that they could, by drinking my wine, kind of join me on it in that sense. So I feel very good in this moment talking to you now.
It'd be fun as if we did a trade. I'll get you some grapes from up here, and then
that would be fun. I was just talking to a buddy about doing like a what do you call it? I only have the word co-op in my mind. A collab.
yeah. It'd be like a transfer student or what do they do in high school? Are you international exchange students? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It might be hard to go through Canada, but I would be willing to make the drive to make that happen. That sounds awesome.
I can haul a couple bins on my truck, so
We'll have to talk more about that in the future.
I love it. So.
That's awesome. Okay, perfect segue into the wines that you're making. The first thing that's on my brain, just because you touched on it, is you mentioned some Riesling that you're working on now that it sounds like is fermenting, and you're considering halting the fermentation and then bottling and letting it pick back up. Would that be in like a pet nat style?
I would rather do a traditional style. I just don't want to add sugar because I'm lazy, I guess. If there's already natural sugar, and then we don't have to worry about too high of alcohol. So, no, my intention would either to be leave that sugar and go Charmat, or do a traditional method. I'm not totally sure on which direction to go yet. But I made a sparkling Riesling in the past, and I love them, and I want to make another one.
I'm thrilled to hear you say that, because what went through my mind was, does he mean that he's gonna basically halt the fermentation and then do the filtration and treat it like a traditional method sparkling wine? Only because I've not heard of anybody doing that in the past. Kind of like changing. Let me back up a little. My understanding of the way that I expect traditional method sparkling to be made is that typically grapes are harvested early, which means relatively low sugar, high acid, then fermented dry, filtered, and then the sugar, like you mentioned, and the yeast are added back in after. But the concept of halting the fermentation so that there's some sugar left, and then treating it like a traditional method sparkling, but you don't have to add the sugar in, to me is an exciting opportunity, because you can deal with grapes of maybe higher ripeness and change the like weight and, aroma profile by doing that. Am I understanding you right, that that's one of the things that you're considering?
That's the plan right now. Yes. And from my perspective, the end result, I guess I don't really know. I'm willing to not know. But in terms of, so we picked that fruit and it was about 20 bricks. So it's not like super ripe anyways. And the acidity lined up. And so if I would have picked Riesling at 18 bricks and then added sugar for a second fermentation, I would have ended up at 20 anyways, loosely.
Sure.
So why not just take the 20, keep the sugar that's in there? It's pretty easy to keep a wine cool and not oxidizing, and get it clarified from up here in terms of a Riesling, if we're looking at bottling it in February or something. And then, letting that mature in the bottle, or if it might be a tank in that situation.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe but I think it'll be interesting. We did the last one and it worked out pretty well.
I'm interested. Yeah, that's awesome. Did you only make one sparkling Riesling in the past?
So far, yeah.
I guess I'm just surprised, since like looking at your vineyards on your website, it looks like a lot of them are just Riesling. It kind of looks like you're swimming in Riesling.
There's a lot of Riesling around. We make probably more Pinot Blanc and Blaufränkisch than we do Riesling. Same. Those are our three top varieties.
Speaking of which, do you, maybe this is a silly question, but do you think that Michigan has like a Michigan variety, their number one?
No, I'm dead set against it. We're way too young for that. It's like, I'm too young to be a golf player too, golfer. Golf player, that's how bad I am. Jesus. No, I mean, trying to identify with a grape, personally, I feel is a generational thing that we're not ready for. There's a couple of varieties that are pretty interesting. Pinot Blanc, to me, has one of the potentials in the sense that it's very distinct up here. Pinot Blanc from up here is not like elsewhere. And so in some ways that could be something that could be a signifier for us. Riesling, our Riesling tastes like Michigan Riesling, and it has a quality to it that's gorgeous and unique to itself. But I don't think that's our variety. I don't think Cabernet Franc or Blaufränkisch or Pinot Noir is either. We're still in that phase where we're growing so many different varieties that I don't feel comfortable saying we've got something that's going to hang our hat on.
Yeah, totally fair. I just wasn't sure, having so little experience with the Michigan wine scene, I wasn't sure if there was just something that was kind of generally, accepted. I don't know how
There's a
far
lot
back.
about it, and some debate. A number of us are saying, no, don't do that. Let's not hedge yourself in right now. It's
Sure.
too early. So,
Well, I'll put in my notes that when I come to Michigan, that I'll try and squirrel away a bunch of Sauv Blanc to try.
there's some cool
Sorry,
stuff.
sorry, did I just say Sauv Blanc? Pinot Blanc is what I meant.
Well, so there's some really cool Sauvignon Blancs too. I don't make any for Left Foot. I do for a custom client, two custom clients, or whatever. They're part of our family. I don't necessarily make them, but there's a lot of potential for that grape. One of the things is there's so much Sauvignon Blanc out there. Like, do we need another Sauvignon Blanc? But man, ours are pretty cool, pretty interesting. So yeah, that's the fun part is like when you're looking at this stuff and whether looking at signature or terroir or regional things, there's the question of what can we grow, what should we grow, what are we offering to the whole kind of matrix of wine, because if we're just mimicking something, then so what? Who cares?
Totally.
We have something distinct to really bring to it, and that's where I think we do, and we have a number of things we can, and it's just a maturing process. And our region is really going back to the mid 60s, let's say. That's still very young. So we'll find out.
This is just reminding me of an experience that I had in the past couple months where I have one of my good friends is from Michigan, who lives here in Geneva now, and his brother still resides in Michigan. And there was a winery that was closing, I think. I don't remember which winery it was off the top of my head. And maybe you could have told me what the actual story was. But whatever the circumstance was, there was a winery that was selling, it seemed like some other labels bottles for very cheap because it just seemed like old stock that they were trying to get rid of. I think my friend told me like $3 a bottle. And one of them was this Riesling, and it was either from 12 or 15. I think it was from 12. So it was something library, and the brother tasted it and bought a case of it or something like that. And my friend was telling me that he had drank one of these $3 bottles with his brother and that it was this incredible Riesling and that I would have loved it. And I was like, oh, thanks for telling me. And then he managed to get one. I think his brother had a couple left and he brought one back, and without telling me what it was, he like put he served it to me blind, and it was a stellar, like so precise, like perfectly aged, where it showed its age and its evolution, but it was still so youthful. The intensity was there and the concentration, and it was in like the kind of petrol-y direction for Riesling, which I super go for. And it was like perfectly off dry, like maybe 20 grams or something like that to my taste. And I actually guessed that it was a Finger Lakes Riesling, only because I was like, I don't know where else to call this from, But what struck me was that the wine was so good. And for $3 a bottle, I mean, it was maybe one of the most insane deals that I had ever heard of. But I can't remember what you said that made me think of that experience. I think it was just that the Pinot Blanc from Michigan was special, but to me, that Riesling showed an incredible sense of place. And, insofar as it speaks to Michigan wine more broadly, I hope other people can hear this and kind of appreciate to a fraction of the degree the wine that Michigan is producing, just based on what I'm saying.
We do have a great ability to age wines, and some of that is a little bit difficult to market now in this current climate. But what's been fun is we've been hoarding wines, and then like tonight's Monday, we have a wine club member pickup thing, and every Monday we open old bottles of wine, so people that don't have the cellars can come and taste it. I think they're pouring a 2012 actually tonight, and these wines are They have the staying power. I mean, I've got same thing with Finger Lakes. I've got older wines that are just, they're stunning to drink. And, the point of wine doesn't mean you have to hoard it away. But I think as both of our regions grow and the wineries grow, to be able to share that patina that comes out of just time is something that no other beverage has. I mean, maybe cognacs and things like that, but that's more in the barrel aging than it is in the actual bottle. So we've got something, again, that's when you're looking at what's coming forward in the future, we have the freshness. You can drink it right now. It tastes like apricots and apples, and it's beautiful and bright. And you can also let it sit and brood for a couple of years. And now you got something that's deeper and has more, oomph behind it, more experience. And so I'm very optimistic about the future of cool climate growing.
Well, I think giving people the opportunity, like you're doing, to taste library wines is so valuable because, it's not like most of the wines that I drink are 20 years old from the Finger Lakes. That's just not the case. But a lot of my really strong wine appreciative memories come from bottles that have been well aged. And I think that it just takes like those highlights of your wine drinking experience that you can recall to indicate like that it's a special beverage, and that there's this really human component to it of age and appreciating its place and its history, and that there are these little time capsules that, by the way, taste awesome. Yeah.
Well, so while I've got you on the subject, Finger Lakes, was it 21 that was your dynamic vintage for like Cab Franc and Blau, or was it 20?
20 was like super ripe, warm, super dry. 21 was wet, and it was like my understanding is that because 20 was the way that it was, and the vines like went to sleep very happy, that they came back the next year and were just like, grapes, baby, grapes. And so we had like our biggest single vintage at Ravines ever in 21, over 500 tons.
Whoa, okay. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So 20. What about the relationship between vintages between Michigan and the Finger Lakes? I mean, like our super ripe vintages were like 20, 16, 12. And then we had some pretty decent ripeness the past 2 years. And it sounded like based on the rain that you were describing, we had similar rain these past 2 years, but they weren't like the iconic dry vintages. Do those vintages 20, 16, 12 resonate with Michigan's own, or how different are you?
Yeah, that'd be fun to do a comparative tasting. 12 was we had frost, but great vintage, great weather. 16 was excellent. 20 was a kind of a must for us. 24 is excellent, well, it's excellent in the sense if you like big, heavy, like it's our biggest vintage we've had in a long time. A lot of weight, a lot of depth, a lot of alcohol. I got 14.5% Kerner and, things that are like a little out of our range normally.
Wow.
So, this vintage again was I would take this vintage. 22 is probably my favorite vintage ever, in terms of just good ripeness and, straightforward. So I think we have some correlation. Sometimes like you guys have gotten hit with something. Was it 23? You said you got frost.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have it in that year. We had a huge crop that year, no frost. But like the South, or last year, 24, the South of Michigan hit, and we didn't. Some years we get hit and they don't. So it's. I think they're correlated, but not directly linked.
Right. Cool.
Which again, makes the whole world so interesting to taste because here you have not only the imprint of the vineyards and the people, but the vintage and I don't know. I think this whole Eastern growing cool climate thing is so fascinating in the depth and the broad perspective of what we get to offer the wine drinking public that we are definitely the next thing to pay attention to collectively in the East Coast.
I totally agree. And my appreciation only grows every time I speak with somebody from a different region on the East Coast. The distinction as it relates to the similarities make, I just want to be everywhere all at once, trying to drink as much wine as I can. I'm realizing that we've been chatting for quite a while. I want to ask you about a couple specific things. First of all, when I was looking at your wines, I noticed a couple varieties that I have like zero experience with, which are one you just named, Kerner, and the other one, Auxerrois.
Yes.
Will, will you hit me with what those are like in regards to how they grow and what they're like?
Okay, Osawa first has been grown up here by Bel Lago, a neighboring winery, since the mid 90s. But few other people really planted it. It's a, some people call it in the Pinot Blanc family, but it really is quite different. It's very low acid. For us, it's a quick ripener. I love having it in the quiver for blending. We do single varietals as well, like for our wine club and stuff, but it's really powerful to blend in with Pinot Blanc or even to put in some sparkling wines. If you ever need a little bit of acid cushion, I don't like to deacidify with powders. And I'll use ML in certain ways, but Oxalo is a very good way to even 10% or 5% can cushion some harsh malic or something.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun one to grow. It's a little bit
It
thin-skinned. You got to have your sour rot management, um, ready.
it's an Alsatian variety.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's one of the noble varieties of Alta, where Pinot Blanc isn't actually, but it's a cool grape. I like them by themselves. I really like it blending. And then Kerner is a cross between Schiava or Trollinger and Riesling. So it's a white grape, a little bit of a peach hue, a little bit thicker skin. I like to do a skin contact overnight in the press, and then we love fermenting it in older oak like puncheons. I've got it in a 1,200 liter foudre right now. Something that gives you a little more air in the fermentation. It has a kind of like Gewürztraminer light aroma quality to it, with a body of really like a richer dry Riesling in a way. Still like dry and acidic, but a little less edgy, maybe. It's a great variety, ages well. One of my favorites. We only have an acre, and there's probably only 5 acres in Michigan, but a fascinating variety, and it's really easy to grow. It likes to ripen. It winters well. It's good for the farm.
What's the like cluster like?
It's a little bit of a denser cluster. It's definitely compacted. We don't have a lot of botrytis issues with it. It's thicker skin, so it can resist it. But it's a longer, tighter cluster. Not as tight as Riesling. I don't know where to put it in between. Maybe a looser Chardonnay and Riesling, I guess. That red parentage seems to stretch it a little bit, but it's definitely, their berries are touching.
Yeah, the red parent I think is really interesting. I'm sure that there are other varieties that exist that have that same quality, but I am not particularly familiar with a lot of like the lineages of different varieties. Did you say that it has a slightly pinkish skin, or did I make that up?
It's sort of a peach colored. It roses a little bit, but it's not anything that you would get color. It's not anthocyanins. It's just more almost like a suntan quality to it.
Okay.
And it comes off as peach in the texture and the flavor. It's like a peach skin that gets that sun.
Oh, that sounds awesome. You had me with Gewürztraminer light. That sounds incredible.
I really don't think that the Finger Lakes should plant it, though. I think it's a terrible idea for Finger Lakes growers.
Why is that, out of curiosity?
Because you guys are really good at doing a lot of stuff, and maybe just let us have our moment.
Well, the good news is I don't think I have the pull to convince a lot of people to start planting Kerner, so I think you're safe for now. I wouldn't expect.
It's a great wine for the table. It's very expressive, and it can handle a lot of food variety. So it's versatile.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll put that on my list of things to buy bottles of when I come up. Another one of the wines that I wanted to ask you about that really stood out. I think I do this thing where I ask people about all the like what would be considered the stranger wines or the less typical wines, but I also don't want to give anybody listening the wrong idea. It seems like a lot of your wines are very conventionally made. You have like a lot of Rieslings and Reds and Pinot Blancs and Pinot Gris. But one of the ones that I want to get your take on is this 2024 Alefki Skin Contact Pinot Gris.
Yeah.
Specifically, what I noted was 24 days on the skins, and that the color is like so rich, and it said lightly effervescent. Will you just talk to me a little bit about that wine?
Yeah, so we have a gamut of how we ferment. I'm not opposed to volunteer fermentations. I also like to choose yeast and inoculate. It's kind of a year by year, grape by grape kind of decision.
Did you say volunteer fermentation?
Yeah, I like that better than native.
I like that too.
Because I don't know where the volunteers are coming from. Is it the vineyard or is it the hose or is it the winery? I don't know. We keep a clean winery, but you never know. But anyways, so we call that LFC. So left foot Charley, but this is kind of our off-brand. Long story, doesn't matter.
I think I see the connection. LFC, left foot Charley.
Yeah. So the LFC, this is part of what I'm doing in this little studio winery I've got here. So I'm going back to trying to garage yeast a little bit. So that's a volunteer fermentation. We've made skin fermented Pinot Gris since 2018, and they often come out as orange wines, and that's great. And we were trying to make an orange wine this year. And 24, there was just so much, I think, skin ripeness and color development because of the vintage. The color never left, and it came out as a deep rosé. And I tried to oxidize it. I put it into puncheons. I put it into like clay amphora, or they're ceramic, and I just wanted to see if we could get the orange for it to turn the orange realm, and it wouldn't. And so about, I think it was February or March, I decided to forego that and let's bottle it, see if we can lock that deep ruby color in. And so bottled it. It was dry, but it was still sort of going through ML. And so we capped it, and we didn't really use SO2. I used CO2. So there was a little bit of, I guess, in essence, forced carbonation, but it's not carbonated. It was more like a protective concept, and put it into sparkling bottles just in case it went off on us. And it didn't. It did finish ML. So there's just a tiny little petulant quality to it. And it's an exciting wine. It's got, geez, I don't even know how to describe it. It's got the earthiness of a skin fermented Gris, but it's not dominated by like forest floor and leaf quality. It has enough kind of bramble fruit and stuff going on that the tannins and the fruit and the earthy, it's not funky even. It doesn't have any, weird yeasty qualities. It's kind of its own thing. I don't think I can make it again. We tried again this year. It didn't. It's not really responding the same. So I think it's the one-time thing.
Interesting. Yeah, it's maybe I'm not looking at the picture of the bottle anymore, but it struck me as kind of like maybe a blood orangey kind of color, like
Yeah.
much more on that red side.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. It's in the bottle, looking at it in person, it's red. I was shocked that it's Pinot Gris.
It looks dark. Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with Pinot Gris as a variety, it's most often made in a white style, but the skins can have quite an amount of color. Like Gewurz also has like some color to the skins. And something that I've been noticing, kind of just like you're saying, Bryan, is that in our riper vintages, we have a tiny amount of Pinot Gris in the vineyard, and we basically just use it for projects for like anybody who wants to make something in the cellar, because we have enough to make like 15 gallons. But when we bring it in, there's a distinction between vintages in how dark those berries are. I mean, it's plain to see, and it's easy to imagine how in different vintages you would have different levels of color extraction.
We often use skin contact for our Grigio, and we make quite a bit of Pinot Gris. And I like doing like 12-hour skin contacts. And you'll get in the fermentation on those a little hue, like they're pink when you're starting to ferment them, but then it fades pretty quickly. But on these skin fermented ones, where you're actually going the full bore, yeah, you definitely lock it in. But this particular vintage is something I'm not sure that I'll see it again for a while.
Cool. Well, I know that you have a thing to do. I've just got a couple more questions for you. I have a couple of wines that stood out to me. The one as I'm looking over my notes here, Longcore Cab Franc, non-vintage, one barrel from 20, the vintages 20, 21, and 22 from the same Longcore vineyard. What is specifically in my mind is there's another producer in the Finger Lakes who I intend to interview at some point going forward, who has a non-vintage red blend very similar to this, and I think it's even across 3 varieties. And I'm interested in what why you did this and what your take is on these non-vintage blends, what kind of vibe you get from it, would you do it again, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Only specifically the part of my brain I think that's asking is the one that says like there's not a lot of opportunity to drink wines like this, and so I want to suck in information about it.
Yeah, so it's one barrel from each vintage. So it was a 3-barrel bottling.
And that also means that like the barrel from 20 would have been in barrel for like that whole time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was, yeah. And then the last one was only in for whatever, 10 months or something. So as part of this co-op model that I've got, a lot of the people that I establish vineyards with have aged like all of us, and some of them have moved on to different realities. And Jim Longcore passed away in 2019. And throughout his later part, there's a lot of things that were done in the vineyard that were sort of band-aid because we couldn't figure out what was going on health-wise with him. So we were just kind of like getting through vintages in a way. And when he finally passed, the vineyard needed some kind of redirection. And so the family wanted to keep it in vines. And so I went to them and said, hey, can I just take this over as a personal project? And I want to prune this. I want to get it to a form that I've been looking for, and get it back to what Jim was doing, in his youth, basically. And so they agreed. And so the first year we had to really bring the trunks back down and get them lower and reestablish the form of the vine. So we lost a lot of crop by doing that. So I had enough to make one barrel. And so it sat. And then the next year was the same thing. And then the third year was kind of the same thing. And I told them, we knew it would take 4 to 5 years to reestablish. So we had this opportunity. We had 20, which was a moderately ripe vintage. 21 was pretty good. 22 was pretty excellent. And so we decided, let's blend them all together and just make the one wine out of the recovery period. 23, we were back to a normal production. And this is only half an acre. So it's a very small block. But in the process of watching that 20 age, we got those age tones, and then, kind of lowering the degree, but the ripening went up. So it was a kind of a converse relationship in terms of aging and ripeness. And it just made a very interesting balanced wine. And in terms of non-vintage, I think it's a powerful tool for areas like ours where we may have, different imprints from the vintage on how deep the ripeness goes, but maybe age could be the factor that turns certain vintages forward. And maybe they do need to be worked together more. So I'm definitely open to the idea of blending multiple vintages. It's a luxury to be able to hold wine because it's expensive and, room and all of that. But as we're getting older as a winery, we're finding that we do have these opportunities. Maybe we should keep things back and then put, different vintages together and be less tied to every vintage having to be its own album. And maybe we do compilations every once in a while. So I haven't done a specific one. I've done it with white wines a couple times. I haven't done another red yet, but I'm looking at it this year with a couple varieties.
Cool. I will keep my eyes open for that. It's just a unique style of wine that you don't see very often, and I think this story element that you just provided to us makes it even more meaningful. And the way that you describe, the how the vintages kind of balance each other out, with one vintage obviously having spent longer time in barrel and one being much younger and fresher, to me totally makes sense. And I can't help but think in my mind how I'm going to try and implement something like this into some of my production in the future.
The best part about getting older in wine is that you have more chances to do, I don't know, to play around with that kind of stuff. And I'm just hitting this point, like, as I was telling you earlier, like, I think I might be your oldest guest, which is weird to me because I still feel like I'm just starting out. I don't know this stuff yet. But as the winery has grown, we've had more opportunity to goof around like this. And that goofing around is becoming almost more of a directive. In the early days, it was like, let's make stuff solid. Let's like get respect. Let's do this. And then, we still haven't gotten the respect maybe, but, um, to have opportunities to reach into these avenues. And again, this is where a lot of the young people working around here are bringing ideas and opportunities too. But also, it's the old guard who have moved on, who now also open up opportunities because they establish these older vineyards. Now I'm working with 25, 30-year-old vineyards, and you see things a little differently. And it's kind of fun to I don't know, have the freedom to play around and experiment, see what happens. It's 3 barrels. Significant for me, but in the world perspective, if everybody that lives on the street across from us bought that wine, we'd be sold out in a day.
Wow.
So, but that's the fun part of it. These things come, they're little flashes, and grab them when you can.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think I'm of a very similar philosophy to you. And like you said earlier, wine has a way in instances of kind of getting in its own way, and it's steeped in tradition. And I think it's easy to get into that mode. I think actually you said this exact same thing where it's just kind of this is the way we do things. And hearing about more opportunities and instances where people like yourself are intentionally not doing things the way that they've always been done, I think as a winemaker is very exciting, but also as a wine consumer is very exciting. And I hope that it is part of what, this kind of new age of wine and wine production, what's happening around us.
Yeah. Now that being said, I do have some very traditional stuff too. A couple of vineyards are not like, let's do it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Well, you're talking to somebody who inoculates everything and is really afraid of volunteer ferments. So
I've been very afraid of them. And again, it was Wes who kind of brought it in. And then I got another custom client, Boss Wines, who's pretty insistent on wild ferments. And we've been working these things. I'm getting more confidence. And I did more volunteer fermentations on red wines this year, even for Leftfoot, than I've ever done, to pretty good success. And I'm kind of encouraged by that, only in the sense that yeast is expensive and it is another thing. And I've always had the belief that yeast is a functionary partner in the sense that you can read the catalogs and see all the esters and all the things. It reads like a wine list. It's like, oh, it brings peach and stone fruit and blah, blah, blah. But what I've always looked for in yeast is the behaviors of them. Are they fast fermenters? Are they nitrogen hogs? Do they need, a lot of attention? If they get cold, will they die? That kind of stuff. Like, what kind of attitude do I want from the yeast is more where I've been going. And if I can find that in the yeast that are either in the winery or in the vineyard or whoever's doing the fermentation, then maybe that could be another tool, asset, whatever. Maybe it's something I like. So this year, Blaufränkisch, we ran quite a bit. We did have a few where, it was kind of going a direction. I'm like, I had, some in the quiver to add some inoculum. So I'm not diehard on it, but I'm very intrigued by maybe we can get away with a little bit more than what we were taught. And maybe it isn't so scary to let things start to go. But with that, it's also important to make sure you have a crew, a staff, clean fruit, all of that stuff lined up so that it's not just a rodeo. We're coming in with things we kind of know we can control from the get-go.
Totally. Have you experimented with using P to couves at all?
Yes. Yeah. Successfully. I like it, especially in the early going. I got a couple of custom clients that are sample maniacs, and they love sampling, and they're bringing samples constantly. And they're bringing big samples, and so we started collecting carboys, and we're using that as our P to couve to get things going. And they've actually worked pretty well. We have a Valvin Muscat we make for Boss Wines. That's the mother that gets going, and it works well. It's a kind of a pet nat. We then use that same P to couve for the kind of the final let it finish. So yeah, I think that's a real smart way to go, because then you have a known quantity you can kind of gauge. I've got a ML right now. Well, I don't know if it's an ML yet. We're testing it to find out. But I think one of our shards is going through, and I really like it. I'm hoping it's ML because I want to then capture that and use it for a couple other things. So it's intriguing. There's times I don't think we can do it on the brewery level where they can keep a yeast culture alive for multiple generations. But if you have these moments and these flashes within a vintage where maybe something really cool is happening, maybe that could be something to pass on to another fermentation. So that really is, again, credit to Wes, because I was very much, no, we inoculate, we do all these things, and I still am largely, but I do like the opportunity to play around with it. I think there's some things to be discovered there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think first, let me just say, for anybody who is unfamiliar with the concept of a pied de cuve, it's like where you put juice together a small amount and let it start to ferment naturally, and then you use that to inoculate a bigger volume of juice with, so that you're not just leaving a big lot of juice to hopefully go the right way on its own. It's like a slightly safer way of dealing with volunteer fermentations. And I only ask because on carboy levels, I keep trying to get a good spontaneously fermented wine, and I just can't do it. It either oxidizes to all hell, or just sits and doesn't do anything, or starts to smell like crap. And after speaking about with one of my friends who basically uses a pied de cuve dogmatically to some degree, it strikes me that I think that that's just the smart way to go, if you're really going to lean into that volunteer direction.
I'm really scared on white wines still. Like I'm very cautious on whites. Reds, I have a little more comfort in because of the mass that you have within that. The other thing I think that helps is heat. And that, like, some of these red fermentations that started, we had some ethyl acetate, you get that acetone thing going on, and you're like, oh, shoot, what's going on? And I do find that once the heat really builds in from when the Saccharomyces takes off, that goes away. Like they consume it, or it becomes, it wasn't that, there's nothing else to compare it to. So it seemed relatively strong, and it really wasn't. So I think it's a progression. You almost have to be willing to go through the bumpy road and the turbulence for a minute. And in a carboy, I can imagine it being really difficult because there isn't a mass to really get rolling and build.
Yeah.
And with white wines, anything I want delicacy or, finesse with. I like wine yeast that do not contribute a lot of esters. We try to use very neutral yeast as much as we can. So I'm not really into using yeast as a tool to manipulate an end, known result, as much as get me good, clean, fermentation, get me alcohol, and get the sugars out of here and let the vineyard do the work. So when we're using cultured yeast, that's sort of a philosophy. But with these reds, I'm starting to see there's probably some potential for this.
Yeah, interesting. One thing that's going through my mind is we are of the mind that we try and put off bottling what we can. Typically, our Riesling is last to be bottled as late as possible, hoping that much of those fermentation esters will blow off. But I had not thought about the relationship of a more neutral yeast. Like I think 1118 is one that people call very neutral, as kind of being like maybe not a substitute, but a way of approaching this same problem, which is that, what you maybe don't want in some instances is to smell the fermentation, but rather the wine that's underneath. And by choosing less ester producing yeast, that seems like a perfectly, obvious way that I had never thought of until you said it, to try and, get to the wine that's underneath and not to the fermentation process itself.
Blending those cultures is fun too. Like putting something like 228 with, I don't know what another one would be, but I don't know, mixing them and letting them figure out who's going to win the battle.
Oh, really? You don't have any problems with when you do that?
No.
Huh, cool.
I used to use this yeast for Riesling in particular. It was a red yeast from Anchor. And I don't use a lot of Anchor yeast because they're pretty aggressive or overt. But they had one, I can't remember what it's called right now. Doesn't matter. But it was a red wine yeast, and I used it because it was easy to halt. But I always put a little 228 with that to give a little lift. And those two would work really well together. And then you could chill the tank down and you'd be left with it was easy, very easy to halt. And I remember talking to the anchor rep. She's like, "You're using that wine for WE 372 is what it was called. They don't sell it anymore." And she's like, "You're using that for Riesling? That's absurd." I'm like, "Well, I don't know. It works." So I think sometimes when you get into the catalogs, you start, again, it's like a wine list. You start to believe what the somm is telling you, which, no offense to somms, I'm not saying that. That's your job. But the yeast companies market like that. And sometimes, you're like, "Oh, well, this is the yeast I should use because it gives me these aromas." And maybe what you really want is to get through fermentation without H2S and without all these other problems. So
yeah,
I'm more of a behavioralist than a end result.
I get sucked into the same thing. I bought this malolactic bacteria and, it was like tropical fruit and pear and blah, blah, blah. And my Chardonnay did not turn out that way. I love the way my Chardonnay turned out, but bad news. That was, as far as I'm concerned, more or less a lie. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much. I just have one quick wrap up. I feel like I could sit and talk with you for much longer, but I just have one quick wrap up question that I like to ask everybody at the end, which is, what do you drink for dinner, or will you drink for dinner on average? Are you drinking Left Foot Charley wine or water or milk? Or
I do like water. Life-giving water is always good.
Water's good.
And we drink Left Foot wines because they're easy access for us. I'm very fortunate that we have a great wine community, and so I get the opportunity to taste a lot of world wines. And one of our great collaborators, Christy McClellan, owns a wine shop in town, and so we trade a lot. So I do get I signed up for their wine club, bought it as a gift for my wife. So we drink a lot of world wines. I do the typical phasing of finding things I like and seasonally and all that kind. I really got into crispy white wines this summer to a point of like excess probably. But in terms of, I don't have a go-to really. I kind of want to try something different every night. So I'm a bit of a glutton that way. Or not every night, but
Yeah, and I think enjoying drinking something different every night is a good answer. That
a concrete one. Last night we drank a Schönheit's Pinot Blanc from Alsace. That was great. We had a kind of a mock off of Saltimbocca, just a prosciutto wrapped, real thin pork with this Pinot Blanc. It was fantastic.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And I'm just remembering that I still get to eat dinner, and I'm really excited for that. Bryan, thank you so much for your time. I had a lot of fun speaking with you, and I'm really looking forward to coming up to Michigan, talking with you more about maybe getting some grapes to each other or something like that. This was wonderful. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate being on this. This is a great time. Let's trade wines too.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, Bryan. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening. I'm thrilled you could make it to the end of the podcast. If you have any thoughts on questions you'd like me to ask or comments about your experience, I'd love to hear them. Please don't hesitate to email me at eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.